was helping out. She returned during the Fredericksburg Campaign, December 1862. Clara Barton helped care for the wounded soldiers on both sides that were brought into the house. So here you have this house, it's serving as a hospital. They don't have anesthetics and antiseptics. It's pretty crude. And if there's a wounded arm or a leg, they would cut it off. And often there'd be piles outside the window of limbs that were cut off. And so here she is volunteering to help. A lot of times it's freezing cold. A physician requested Clara Barton's help in the city, and this required her to cross over a pontoon bridge over the river. As she stepped off, an officer offered her his hand. Suddenly, a shell passed under their arms, tearing away part of her shirt and coattail, and his coattail, and then later the officer died. So she's walking and being right in the midst of the fire. Clara Barton set up a soup kitchen at the Lacey House, which became a makeshift hospital for the Union Second Corps. With doctors too busy to keep medical records, Clara wrote in her diary the names of the men who died and where they were buried. Her diary is at the Clara Barton National Historical Site in Maryland, and it became one of the key records to actually find out where these soldiers were buried. On December 13th, 1862, the day of the heaviest fighting, Clara was in the doorway of the Lacey House when an exploding shell severed a soldier's artery. She immediately applied a tourniquet, and it saved his life. A tourniquet was this process of tying a cloth around the wounded area and taking a stick and twisting the stick, and it would squeeze the limb tighter and tighter until the bleeding stopped. You don't want to leave it on for a long time, but it would stop the bleeding long enough for them to sew the artery. Another time, crossing the river again, a Union provost marshal thought she was a civilian and volunteered to escort her to safety. But looking at the thousands of Union soldiers, she politely declined the offer, saying that she was the best protected woman in the world with all those soldiers. When a shell struck the door of the room that she was in, where they were doing an operation, quote, she did not flinch, but continued her duties, is what the assisting doctors said. The next 2 weeks at Chatham, Clara Barton saw hundreds of the most wounded men I have ever seen, occupying every room in the house. She wrote, they covered every foot of the floors and the porticos, the stair landings. A man thought himself rich if he laid under a table where he would not be stepped on. Clara saw 5 men stuffed onto 4 shelves of a cupboard. Others shivered in the cold, muddy yard of the house on blankets, waiting for someone inside to die so that they could be brought in. Clara Barton set up a soup kitchen in a tent in the yard to help them. The Library of Congress has a letter Clara Barton wrote to her cousin from the headquarters of the 2nd Army, the 2nd Division, 9th Army Corps, Army of the Potomac Camp near Falmouth, Virginia, dated December 12, 1862, 2:00 a.m. My dear cousin Vira, 5 minutes time with you. And God only knows what those 5 minutes might be worth to many doomed thousands sleeping around me. It is the night before a battle. The enemy there and its mighty entrenchments lie before us. The river between. At tomorrow's dawn, our troops will essay to cross, and the guns of the enemy will sweep those frail bridges at every breath. The moon is shining through the soft haze with a brightness almost prophetic. For the last half hour, I've stood alone in the awful stillness of its glimmering light,